Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the Foundation for Science and Technology. First of all, congratulations on not being creatures of habit. This is the true spirit of science. It doesn't matter how often it has happened in the past. If there's new evidence, you have to respond to it. And you have had the ingenuity and enterprise to come here to Central Hall, Westminster. Thank you very much for doing that. By the time we had fixed on this event, we had sadly lost the opportunity of booking our usual place at the Royal Society. So we're doing something different here this evening, and no harm in trying a different approach. We're delighted that Sir Paul Nurse has joined us, because this is an opportunity for the community to focus on his powerful second review of the Rdi landscape, and we will be hearing from him in a moment. Paul, of course, is the director of the Francis Crick Institute. He has also served as president of the Royal Society and served for many years on the Council for Science and Technology. So we'll hear from Paul, and I'll then introduce our speakers after him: Onwurah, Peter Thompson, Vivienne Stern. They'll come up here and then take their places back in the hall, and then we'll all assemble as panelists at the end for the Q&A session. For our participants who are online, do start putting down your questions now. Please use the Q&A function, not the chat function, and also do upvote the questions that you think are particularly pertinent, because it will help me identify the key questions to ask of our panel. And now, with no more ado, let's hear from Paul. A fantastic report with some really punchy proposals. Paul, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for those remarks, David, and thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you, and for having a discussion about the review. I don't really need to start with what I'm about to start with for this audience, but this isn't all about simply science, and that's because RDI is crucial for the UK, and I just want to actually start there. It's an essential driver of productivity, of sustainable economic growth, achieving societal and strategic benefits, improving public services, the quality of our lives, protecting the environment, meeting future global national crises and challenges. Not just about science, it's about making the UK a successful country. I just wanted to emphasize that to start with. The review is rather long. I apologize for that. It's 150 pages, even the summary is 20 pages. I thoroughly recommend it to you if you're having trouble sleeping at night. It's very, very good for that. It took some time to put together. It involved 270 different pieces of evidence, interviews and information from national but also many international organizations and individuals at all levels in the RDI endeavor. It identified, in my view, significant problems about the UK RDI endeavour, some of which have been long-standing and serious. In some respects, it's a rather dull piece to read, because it actually deals with fixing the problems rather than announcing bright, shiny new things, which can be a tendency in these things. Sometimes it's said that the UK discovery research engine is in good shape, and all that needs fixing is its application for economic and societal benefit. That definitely does need fixing, but so does the UK RDI discovery engine, because it's fragile and in jeopardy. It's hanging in there, but it needs help, and this review is aimed at giving it help. It makes 29 recommendations, quite a lot of recommendations, which need to be looked at together. I keep being asked, what are the priorities? There's not priorities, there's a whole range of things that need to be implemented. I use this term of a revolution through evolution, that is building on the structures that we have, rather than ripping things up with all the consequences that you have of that instability. What are the main findings and proposals? I'm going to deliver them to you not in the same structure as the review itself, but just to try and crystallize things. The first is the UK government underspends on the research it both performs and the research that it supports. Performs means it's done within government departments or directly funded by government departments, as compared with international comparator countries. This problem's been confused by historically poor data collection, I'm afraid, which is hugely underestimated in industrial spend. I can't believe that we talk about it. I can't believe that's been out there for so long. Also underestimated the amount that universities themselves spend on research, and how that could have been missed, I simply don't know. But what I also think has been missed is what I just said about government spend. Perhaps it was our policy people, both academic and also government, were aware of it, but if they were, they weren't talking about it. That's all I can say. I'll tell you what we've calculated, and by we I mean the civil service team that supported me and myself. It needs checking by the ONS. But we calculate that the research and development performed by UK government is 0.12%, and that is half of the OECD average of 0.24 to 0.26%. Remember, OECD isn't G7 and G10. It's less than half of the OECD average. If we now look at the R&D funded by UK government, it's 0.46% of GDP, which puts the UK 27th in 36 OECD nations, where the average is 0.6%, and compared with the US, Germany, South Korea, which is between 0.7 to 1% approximately, compared with our 0.46%. Now, why haven't we been shouting that from the rooftops for the last decade? But the review identifies it. The data needs checking. The data needs checking, just to make that clear. But essentially, there needs more investment in RDI, and that also, and I'm not going to say much more about that, it needs to be embedded in a stable government policy environment to reduce too much policy volatility, which I would say is what I see in Plan B if I have time to get to that, yet more volatility. Second point, that RDI investment by the UK government needs to be better delivered. In the past, there's been, in my view, too much emphasis only on the direct costs of RDI programs, insufficient attention on what I call complete end-to-end funding of RDI. That's the actual total cost of carrying out RDI. And that includes things beyond the direct support, including proper investment in support for boring things like administration, so that highly paid researchers don't have to do it themselves, which is happening particularly in the university. The provision of sophisticated technical cores and facilities, which are communally applied rather than simply in those labs that can attract most direct costs, ensuring well-found labs, and also that lab buildings are in place. The lack of admin support means these trivial tasks are given to researchers, wasting money, in fact, by distracting researchers from their main tasks. I know that doing high-quality research is difficult, and I also know researchers need time to think, and they are too much of the time doing trivial administration. I have examples if you want to ask me later. So there should be a focus on covering the full end-to-end funding, dealing with things like FECs, full economic costs, dealing also with QR. Third point, the diversity of our research-performing organisations needs to be examined and increased, in my view. That landscape, the UK RDI landscape, is complex. The main sectors are universities, PSREs, that's public sector research equivalent, you'll be hearing about those a bit later, research institutes and units, industry, and then a whole sort of gemisch of other stuff, academies, museums, translational promoting institutions, and the like. I just call it other because I couldn't think of anything coherent to say to it. Now, over the last 30 years, research in the UK, we believe, has carried out in universities and industry has grown, whilst PSREs, institutes and units supported by government have dramatically shrunk down to 1/3 of what they used to be 30 years ago. 1/3. So the figures are in the review. International comparisons show that 80% of non-business R&D is in the universities in UK, compared with 45 to 60% in other countries. Again, these figures need to be checked, but these are dramatically different. Our universities are generally very good and are highly competitive on the international stage. They need to be supported well. But the UK PSRE system and also institutes and units also are important. PSREs not only do fundamental research, don't like the word fundamental, discovery research, prefer that, okay, but they also provide a national infrastructure for RDI, technical services, regulatory standards, sovereign expertise, emergency responses, not naturally things that universities are actually that good at delivering. Institutes and units provide a real dedicated laser focus on research mission and are very attractive to the highest quality researchers. And our best institutes and units are prominent also on the world stage. So we need to look at whether we've got the right balance in our proportional spend in our different RPOs at the same time as defending the research that is carried out within the universities. So it needs an expanded budget, as I've said. Fourth point, there needs to be increased knowledge of and permeability between the range of RPOs in the UK RDI landscape. I've already said that landscape's complex, difficult to navigate, but it is also highly siloed. They're very separate, one from another. Knowledge transfer between the sectors, in my view, is too low. But better understanding and knowledge of all those sectors is required to allow navigation through that landscape. Finances and capabilities must be accurately and regularly reported. I mean, just what I've told you should have been obvious to policymakers for a decade. They were not. You cannot make decent policy if you don't have decent data about what you're making policy about. Having that knowledge, having good dissemination of that knowledge will improve permeability of ideas, technologies, and people. And this is particularly important, I would suggest, for interactions between industry and academia. By the way, my review didn't deal with industry, it was to deal with the public purse primarily, but we did deal with the interface with in industry. I also think universities could have a special role in increasing permeability, and with a role which occurs in some US universities to provide services to their local industry and communities for relevant research wherever it may be found in the UK, and not just the research found in their particular university. So if you have a company in Middlesbrough and there's relevant research going on in Bristol, they know about it and they connect it, because we're not going to be able to have all the research needed across the country. And just that one thing is something worth doing. Fifthly, which I won't say anything about, reduce unnecessary and excessive bureaucracy. There's been another review by Adam Tickle. We just need to run the place actually better. This is a particular problem, I would say, for the PSREs, and I think it is a particular problem that the UKRI should have a role in reducing bureaucracy and defending the research councils from government and treasury restrictive rules and regulations. A role of the UKRI is to defend our research endeavour as well as enhancing our research endeavour. Sixth point, talent is critical to RDI, and we need to nurture talent. We need to attract international talent, but we also need to train homegrown talent at all levels, from technicians and people who are working in more lowly positions in labs right through to the professors. We need all of them. They all have something to contribute. And the knowledge of the opportunities and possibilities should be increased across the permeability in sectors. In other words, if you're trained in a university, you should be aware of PSREs, which most aren't, by the way. You know, I'm looking at, because they just don't know about them, because they've never seen a PSRE, for example. Okay. So in addition to that, early career researchers, technicians, graduate students, postdoc researchers, starting research leaders do need better employment conditions and proper training. It does need attention. There's a lot of depression out there to improve their cost effectiveness. Seventh and final thing, although I will have one thing more to say after that, we need to have in place effective international RDI arrangements. You know where this is going, of course. Central to this is association with Horizon Europe. EU researchers are by far the biggest grouping with which UK researchers interact and collaborate. Over 40 years, we've built up complex set of networks and contacts, which are hard to set up, easy to destroy. Horizon Europe pulls on 27 nations of high-quality scientists who can be involved in reviewing and all sorts of things. It is absolutely a no-brainer, which has almost universal support across the research endeavour, but we haven't done it. Not only have we not done it, but the delaying, the worrying about relatively small sums of money is actually damaging our present activity. I want to emphasize there's three main groupings of science in the world: North America, Asia, particularly based on China, and Europe. If we float off, as I say, into the cold northeast Atlantic by ourselves, we will not be part of one of those three groupings. It's a huge, huge mistake. We need leadership to get us into that European grouping. It would be easy to deliver. I have no idea why we have not yet delivered it. Final point on this, all the recommendations, there's quite a few of them, will provide a blueprint that can bring about the revolution that I think we need. Now, at the very end, I'm just going to say what we could do immediately, because what I have in here is actually a big task. So if I'm allowed to just spend 2 more minutes on that, Mr. Chair? Yes, very good. Sorry, Lord Chair. I got that wrong. Yeah. There are some immediate actions that we could carry out which don't cost very much, and I emphasize that because the poor government is in a bit, is in a financial mess, and there's no point in not recognizing it. So the immediate actions. I think, first of all, we have to look at the financial sustainability. That is full economic costing and QRs and also direct grants. I recommend that the government, working with UKRI and others, should immediately set up a planning and implementation group to see what is practical to deliver it. That doesn't cost money, but it starts the planning so we do it properly, and we do it properly when more money comes along. Secondly, we've identified significant problems in the running of PSREs, and they require mission clarity, permeability, agility in funding. And the review has shown that it's clearly fragile, and a major problem is quite simply that they are subject to government restrictions and in how they operate in their planning and implementation, not least what salaries they can pay their researchers, which are in no sense competitive. So this could be swept away, just like the controls over the European Union rules. These could be just swept away in exactly the same way. So I'd focus on that because it would be more useful than some of the other things that we're talking about sweeping away. Thirdly, the review found that a number of the institutes that have been set up in recent years, and I spoke to all of them, Rosalind Franklin, Alan Turing, Henry Royce, Dementia Research Institutes, Tyndall Centre for Climate Change, probably others, are not working effectively for all sorts of reasons. Primarily, they weren't set up with the right budgets, nor the right governance, for that matter. You put up a shiny new building, back to my bright shiny new building, and you don't look beyond the first year. Big problem. So all of these should be overhauled in the next year to see what isn't working and what needs to be done to make them work. So we know what to do when the valve is open. There is a particular significant issue with healthcare RDI, and that's been picked up in the last week with the Academy of Medical Sciences. There's too much pressure on our clinical researchers because of their NHS duties. This is damaging seriously medical research in the UK. All this is mentioned in the review, and we need to correct it. It just needs correction because we are losing our research base in medical research. I mentioned already the universities having an extra role providing information about research around the country. We could fund a couple of pilot studies and just see how it works. Maybe it's a rotten idea, some of my ideas are rotten, I do understand that. But we should test it. We should put something in place, see how it works. Sixthly, there were weaknesses in cross-government RDI governance because we don't know enough about RDI. We need to have proper effective mapping in all respects of UK RDI across the country in all disciplines. It was put in place sort of half-cocked 5-6 years ago, wasn't followed up. Without data and without information, we can't deliver it. International collaboration, let's just get Europe done, shall we? Let's just get Horizon done. That sounds like a good idea to me. Okay. There are things, all of the things above could be done without too much money. And I think that would be a start. Later stuff does require money, but remember, only 0.12% and 0.46% are half or less of the OECD. Thank you very much.
Got to look after the shadow minister. You never know what might happen. So thank you very much, Paul. That was fantastic. That was a really punchy set of proposals summarising your report. And I think we all loved particularly the moment when you wanted to sweep away all those controls. You were channeling your inner Jacob Rees-Mogg. And I never thought it would happen, but now you've done it, Paul. Our second speaker is Onwurah, elected MP for Newcastle on Tyne Central in 2010, Shadow Minister for Science, Research and Innovation, and also, of course, an electrical engineer by training who previously worked at Ofcom as Head of Telecoms Technology. So, Chi, thank you very much indeed for coming to speak to us this evening.
Thank you very much, David. And let me start by just thanking the Foundation for Science and Technology for inviting me to speak this evening. You know, as an electrical engineer who spent 20 years working in engineering and then found Parliament, what shall I say, not entirely rooted in the scientific method. It's always a real pleasure to be in an evening spend time with people who appreciate and understand science and as well as the wider stakeholders in the research community. And discussing the future of UK science and research is something that is, absolutely critically important, as Paul set out so well. And I do really want, Sir Paul, I do really want to thank Sir Paul for each and every page of his review, because it is truly an impressive and comprehensive review of what, as Sir Paul said, is quite a complex R&D landscape. And the good news is, as the review points out, that as a country, we do have some key strengths and advantages. And I think, we all know our great heritage from the discovery of gravity to the invention of the steam engine in my constituency, can I just say that? Britain has a long and proud science heritage, and we have a world-leading science base. We rank third only behind the US and China in science and technology journals articles. But as well as pushing the boundaries of humanity's collective understanding, and can I just say that is a very important pursuit in itself, but as well as that, science also represents a priceless platform for the UK's future growth, very important to us, and prosperity. So as Sir Paul, puts it, it's only through RDI that our country can thrive, driving sustainable economic growth through increased productivity, improving public services and the quality of our lives, protecting the environment and meeting future global and national crises and challenges. And I agree with every word of that, and I'm sure just about everybody in this room does. And so the review calls on both investment and strategy if we are to achieve this and capitalize on our research space. And I appreciate Sir Paul having set out the key recommendations as well as the quick wins, which is something that we are studying very carefully. But it's also, I think, clear to say from the review that there is work to be done. So I do want to take the next 7 minutes to just say something about about these recommendations and also what Labour's vision is for research and development. How we will stoke the engine of high-skilled growth, access new and diverse talent pools, and catalyse regions which have been left out of science investment. Because currently, it's clear that due to a combination of lack of investment and a lack of industrial strategy, we do not convert our rich science base into a high-skill, high-wage, and highly productive economy. And while the European Union and the US take steps to secure the industries of the future and build sovereign science and technological capabilities, our government, the Conservative government, have let our great UK science startups be bought up or move abroad because of a lack of UK investment options. And instead of action, we've had a succession of Conservative governments who have given us, I've just got a short list here, like not a comprehensive list, not as comprehensive as Paul's review, but we've had an innovation strategy, an R&D roadmap, a science plan, at least one, an Office for Science and Technology strategy, I think twice. We've had grand challenges, we've had sector deals, we've had we've had 2 national science and technology councils, we've now got a science and technology framework, 2 reorganisations of UKRI, and now a whole new science department. And since Sir Paul's review was commissioned, we've had 3 changes of science minister. So this brings me to one of the key recommendations which we are looking at very seriously, and as leaders we have been looking at a similar objective, which is to end the farce of supposedly long-term plans that do not survive the political cycle and which makes it nearly impossible for science investors and businesses to take decisions about their future direction. Both science and business need long-term, you never get certainty in this world or in science for that matter, but they need long-term vision and a plan and steps to achieve that, which they can rely on for more than a few months at a time. So one of our proposals is not only to have an industrial strategy, but also to put in place a mission-based strategy, and I'll just identify what our industrial strategy missions are. Delivering clean power by 2030, caring for the future, it's about our social care, infrastructure, building a resilient economy, and harnessing data for the public good. And then these missions will be overseen by and accountable to an industrial strategy council that will be placed on a statutory footing. So that gives confidence to investors in our innovation, research and development strategy and implementation. Now, that's industrial strategy, and that talks to some of the interface, if you like, between science and business. But as well as that, as I said, science needs a long-term plan of its own. And so we want to support credible long-term R&D funding, such as through, one of the things we're looking at is a 10-year spending cycle. We need to look at how to ensure long-term funding envelopes which still give government the ability to be flexible and agile, delivering effective research outcomes and acting as a magnet for global research, investment and talent. And we also, I think it's clear from the review, we're looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the REF as the importance of stable long-term funding in leveraging private investment as well in key areas was highlighted by the review. And so I particularly welcome review highlighting the patchwork and bureaucratic nature of some of our government-funded R&D. And the landscape it's very complex. It's complex for scientists. It's even more complex for businesses or lay people. Access to the research funding in the UK generally comes with a burden of frequent and repetitive reviews, reporting and audit of research activities. These can be extremely time intensive, as Paul said, and they also place the necessary bureaucratic and financial demands on public sector R&D funding bodies, instead of allowing them to focus on carrying out world-leading and disruptive research and innovation. So we believe there is a need for a clear, coordinated and systematic approach to R&D strategy and policy setting at every level within government. So it's not something that's simply on our radar, or even it's simply been brought to our attention by the review. It is something we're having active conversations and discussions about now, and have been for some months. You know, we look into how we can ensure the delivery, better ensure the delivery of interdepartmental science and technology agendas, and also how we can develop credible alternatives to the frequent and repetitive multi-layered reporting and audit by government departments in UKRI, and to get that trade-off, that balance between accountability and also creating a culture of confidence and earned trust as part of a long-term plan for science. And we also, and I think this is, Paul already touched upon this, we recognise that there is a chronic lack of diversity, not only in institutions, but in terms of people and places when it comes to science opportunities and funding. The Golden Triangle, of which we are very proud, but it receives more public R&D than the rest of England combined, and 65% of the UK STEM workforce is both white and male. As Keir Starmer says, we take our strengths from too few places, both in terms of geography, but also in terms of demographics. And I was pleased to see that the review recognised the key role of universities here. We believe that innovation and science are absolutely critical to building regional economies which are strong and self-sufficient, not dependent on handouts. And so that is why we will champion universities and clusters of universities as engines of regional growth, providing them with the resources and the incentives to collaborate and innovate together with local businesses to drive regional innovation. And I think, Sir Paul, that the prospect of universities directing businesses to research done elsewhere is very attractive, but I'm not sure how to achieve it. Labour are also looking at taking steps to have a richer diversity of researchers' backgrounds and diversity beyond the academic hierarchy, such as funding long-term teams and looking to overcome the inequalities that researchers face in applying for many short incremental grants. And that is one of the sort of the barriers to a more diverse workforce, when particularly considering the caring and other responsibilities that those from non-traditional backgrounds may have. And finally, I was really glad to see the review state firmly, and as Sir Paul has just done, even more firmly, that Horizon Europe is vital to keeping the UK's role as a convener and collaborator in globally important research. And as to why we haven't yet associated, and Labour has made it clear that we would associate, and we believe association is essential, and we also believe it's absolutely in everyone's interest, the UK and the European Union. As to why, we can only speculate, but the fact is that you have to judge by outcomes, and the outcome is that we have yet to associate, and the impact on our science infrastructure, but also our scientists, our research scientists, both in this country and those thinking of coming to this country to collaborate and work, is incredibly detrimental. And we need to make progress in these negotiations, and it absolutely should not have taken us so much time to get to where we still are not. But finally, before I hand over to Vivienne Stern, CEO of Universities UK, if it wasn't clear from what I've said so far, I do just want to emphasize that we in the Labour Party absolutely believes in this nation's R&D and scientific potential, and we see a clear path from science to the jobs that you can, in Joe Biden's phrase, raise a family on. There's high-skill, high-wage jobs that people are proud of and that we need to see across our country, both for our economic prosperity, but I'd also say for our national security and for our social cohesion. The Nurse Review is a fantastic piece of work. Now what we need is a government which is serious about science and serious about creating the outcomes that the Nurse Review seeks. And working in partnership with science researchers, businesses and trade unions, Labour will grab hold of our nation's future prosperity that Britain is capable of for a fairer and greener and more sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chief, for that very interesting and important response to Paul's report. Before Vivienne, we actually next have Dr. Peter Thompson, who is the CEO of the National Physical Laboratory. Before that, served as the Deputy Chief Executive of DSTL. He also had a role as head of the MOD's Counterterrorism Science and Technology Group. And you can tell from the direction of Paul's remarks that he is here as the official representative of all the PSREs in the UK. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Paul, for the review. And good evening, everybody. We're short on time. I'm in charge of time and frequency for the UK. So if I get this wrong, we're in trouble. I feel hugely responsible given the when Paul was pointing his finger, he was pointing it directly at me with regards to what's going on in PSRE land in particular. So thank you again, and thank you for the way that you engage with the community in a very open and transparent way. And the PSRE community in particular feel that their voice has been heard. Now, I've got some pictures as well as some words. The first set of pictures is actually a picture of what she is you can feel me slumping in my chair as the list, but I can add to this. We live in incredibly busy times within sort of science and technology policy, with the integrated review, with three integrated review looking at how science and technology can deliver strategic advantage for the UK. 3 independent reviews, including Sir Paul's, that itself was called for out of the innovation strategy, the people and culture R&D strategy, the National Science and Technology Cabinet Committee that was in and was out, and now it's in again, the changes in the machinery of government, which in addition to my host department, Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, we've got new departments such as the Department for Business and Trade with a significant R&D component, as well as the existing departments with major science budgets. And the Science and Technology Framework up there that actually references over 50 individual strategies that exist across government and connects those, or at least references those, with its 10 recommendations, 10 aspects that it looks at, which actually came out publicly, I think, on the same day that the Nurse Review was published. And then shortly afterwards, the International Technology Strategy was then published. And along with all of this, there's the little matter of our relationship with Europe, but I think that may have been mentioned already this evening. So there's much to tackle. And complexity drives cost, and efficiency can actually deliver greater outcomes for the same investment. There probably isn't a magic money tree that's going to solve all of this, so we have really got to think sensibly and effectively about how we address all of these challenges. But for me, there is definitely a burning platform, there is burning opportunity, and it feels like we should be acting now with all of this data in front of us. Just with reference to the people that I've spoken to, the organisations that I've spoken to pass comments on Sir Paul's review, David mentioned my current and my past. Just to mention for the public sector research establishments, if the public comment that you'll get from a bunch of PSREs will probably be that they welcome the review, because they don't speak publicly on policy issues. They'll be negotiating hard within their owning departments over particular issues, but in that respect their voice isn't heard as much as other communities, and so they're really pleased for this voice. And Airto, who are represented here tonight, which has a mix of public and private organisations, they are able to consult more freely and more openly with government. And as a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering and a trustee and, of the Institute of Physics, and as a non-exec director of one of the catapults, I'm able to, I hope, represent a number of views this evening. The examples I'll give will be MPL examples, so as sort of to just to bring some of these points to life. So, first point, freedoms. 2 points on this. Freedoms around pay, and I think of flexibility around pay here. So within this landscape, we're not playing on a level. This is not a level playing field. There are fantastic government-owned organisations within the UK, but it is becoming increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to attract the best possible talent to these shores to work within the public sector in the current environment. So providing flexibility to enable leaders to actually balance where we make it, where we invest, where we spend our money, alongside infrastructure and all of the other things that one spends in an organisation. Just giving us that flexibility would make a huge difference and can happen very, very quickly. Scope of our organisations. Sir Paul makes comments around clarifying the missions. I would add to that boundaries and swim lanes, when I hear those words described for organisations, I tend to view those as negative terms. They can be used to keep you in a box. I prefer the sort of greyer boundaries, trusting organisations to lead in areas where curiosity-driven research, where discovery-driven research will enable those organisations to actually make the discoveries and support the discoveries of the future. And use, if I move on to trust, actually, which also links back to my points on freedoms. I've lost count of the number of times that other arm's length body organisations will ask, how long are the arms of your owning department? And they vary, I can confirm. But what I would say is there's a lot of time and investment that goes into recruiting leaders. They are public appointments for public sector research establishments in particular. So let those leaders lead and hold us to account for the outcomes that we're here to deliver. So Paul, you talk about new institutes, new units. I'm particularly attracted to the opportunities to take on new initiatives. One very brief example I've got is actually the UK Telecoms Lab, which the old DCMS, now it's part of, now that part of DCMS is within DSIT, asked my lab, NPL, to take the lead on what is now known as the UK Telecoms Lab, opened in October. We went through a whole series of due diligence, but if we'd have just looked at the hard facts, then we could have easily argued that maybe it sat outside of the boundary of NPL. That would have been an inefficient decision, and we look forward to delivering outcomes for government on that basis. Reducing barriers. And one that affects lots of colleagues here, is the full economic cost issue. And so Paul, you drew out this in the Paul Nurse Review number 1. I don't think you called it number 1 at the time because you didn't know there was going to be a number 2. This has been an issue for so long. Simply, we need a problem owner, we need a senior responsible owner for this issue, so that where the best capabilities are sought to address a particular mission, a particular national challenge, it's criminal if those organisations that both industry and academia want in the room and on the programme can't take part because of the way that the work is funded. It makes no sense, and it doesn't. It seems it's not easy to resolve, but it needs a problem owner and it needs a cross-government working party of users and policy owners to really figure out what can be done. Funding. I like the phrase that I say to ministers often when they see things that we do within the landscape, that yes, that was a 10-year overnight success, and that's because of the investment that takes place for the long term that's been mentioned earlier, that allows us to turn those capabilities, and that's not just for PSREs, that's across the landscape. And stability, not just for ourselves, but for the investment community that's going to attract that investment into the UK, a blueprint that will support and encourage and give confidence to that community. The approach that I would encourage is a whole systems view. I like a map as much as the next person, and a systems map, that's just one of many, but if these maps are unintelligible to ourselves, then they're going to be unintelligible to the wider community, and if we can't produce a map of the landscape, that's probably telling us something in itself. Any systems engineer will tell you that for a system or a system of systems, then if you focus in on those interfaces, on the permeability in some respects, then you can make a major difference to that system. Addressing the full economic cost will enable the system to work more effectively. Having a level playing field for people will affect that, because people will move much more easily between the important nodes of this RDI landscape. And in that, you will just get greater knowledge dissemination between the individual components. And I welcome the expert exchange that DCIT has just announced, which will bring people into government. That scratches the surface of what is a major issue for us, but one that we can make a great deal of impact on and deliver strategic impact for the UK. On a national level, we come together very well most of the time in emergencies. When it's business as usual, perhaps we don't. I'd cite one great example that we experienced, which is the Strategic Priorities Fund, a fund set up and for those of us who were able to bid into that, those proposals were reviewed by the CSA community across government, and it was for cross-government challenges, excuse me. And that broke down barriers and enables us now, certainly within MPL, we're delivering a national timing centre capability that supports so many different sectors and government departments. Internationally, we often quote the numbers of how strong our universities are, and they are superb. Do we quote about the whole system? Do we advertise why somebody might want to bring their R&D into the UK? I mean, I think about within MPL, we develop technical standards, we work with the best universities, we work with the best companies to develop those technical standards so that those companies can compete and trade more effectively in the future. Do we, excuse me, do we tell the world that as well as we should do? And on industry and investors, I think many people, I think James Dyson was talking about industry over the weekend. We'd like to see more around industry and investors. Now, there we go, on one behind. If I could just now actually present a map, and Chi, you talked about knowledge dissemination, and so here you will often see these types of diagrams where organisations will tell you where they're based. This is the MPL-shaped diagram. And there's an absolutely valid argument about innovation clusters and science clusters developing around where those organisations are based. I would argue that that's only part of the impact about how we deliver impact across the UK. This is just an example of the second diagram there is just an example of the 200 postgraduate researchers that we co-supervise between MPL and universities and the knowledge that's moving in between those organisations and those universities. But then if I focus in on this third one here, this is just one programme that we have called Measurement for, what's called Measurement for Recovery, it's now called Measurement for Business, and this is a simple system in which we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of small companies to work with them to help them develop their technologies and accelerate those towards the marketplace. Across the UK, because we're working remotely, working more digitally. And then finally, another programme where this is just companies that we've worked with over the last 5 to 6 years and where they are delivering, where their gross value add is within the UK. Close to £500 million this year. So in conclusion, that, for the outcomes that I'm certainly looking for, it's unleashing the PSREs, which I think will deliver excellent impact. Taking that whole systems view with an eye on affordability, understanding what we're trying to achieve and being able to measure that impact. Thinking about the whole capability, that includes infrastructure and people and partnerships. And finally, and as Sir Paul identifies, all of this will be achieved with inspirational leadership and change management across the whole system. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. And our fourth and final speaker is Vivienne Stern, Chief Executive of Universities UK. Before that ran UK International. And of course, Paul's report has got various remarks about the university angle and the university role in the research landscape. So over to you, Vivienne.
Up here because sitting there it's Arctic, so I mean at least I'll escape the air conditioning for a moment. So first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to take part in this debate, and Sir Paul, thank you for the report. It draws together a huge swathe of topics, and I think it's very important that you try to see the big picture, especially given the fragmentation that many of the previous contributors have spoken about. And I want to sort of talk about 3 broad themes, and then I'm going to address a couple of the specific recommendations in the report. The first of them is this idea that, and I think maybe inching towards a consensus, that we need something by way of a longer term approach to research and innovation strategy. I remember when the Sainsbury 10-year science frameworks were introduced back in the kind of early noughties. And the question in my mind is, what can we learn from previous attempts to create stability and predictability through long-term approaches to science strategy? Because as Chi mentioned and as Peter mentioned, it's not like there haven't been strategies published. There's been a little bit, it's in a sense, it's a bit of hyperactivity has been our problem. So how can you, it's one thing to say we need a long-term, stable approach. It is another to define how that will be different from the kind of churn we've had every time the NIST has changed. And I guess I'm just going to suggest 2 things, although others might occur to me as I'm going along. The first is, is it not mostly about stable and predictable funding? Isn't it about making sure that when you're cooking up a bright idea, that there is something coming down the line that will be appropriate to you and the team that you're trying to build, which may be, it may be a multinational team that will allow you to pursue what you are intending to explore. There's something about predictability in the system. Chi's talked about a 10-year spending horizon. I remember I've had a couple of arguments with people about I've had a lot of arguments with people about Horizon Europe in the last few years, but one of the things is not by any means the only thing, it's probably not the most important thing, but one of the things you hear when people talk about why Horizon has been such a fantastically powerful platform is this 7-year investment cycle. It's the fact that a program is published, you know what's coming down the line, you can plan for it, you can start building the team you will apply for, you'll work with to apply for. It's that stability and predictability which has been really valuable. Contrast that with the period that we've experienced in research funding in the UK, where you've had a series of 1-year spending reviews. Probably you could argue that's nobody's fault. We've had a kind of very difficult period in sort of economic and government finance terms, but 1-year spend reviews are pretty hard. It means a whole bunch of money gets spent in a suboptimal way. The number of times we've seen money being kind of sprayed out at the last minute, and people sort of scrabbling around to put an application in for something that is based on a kind of half-baked concept because people just need to spend before the year end. The question I've got is, since, and I'm going to stay away from opining on whether Brexit was a good idea or not, but the idea that we decided to take back control in order to restrict our ability to invest on a long-term basis because we're bound by treasury rules that prevent us from doing, that seems to me kind of nuts, and I think we ought to be starting to call that out. So that's it. So we maybe there's a consensus about a long-term approach, but I think our job now is to think, okay, what do we mean? What is it that will be different about that? What would be a successful long-term framework? The second point I want to make is about talent and collaboration. A lot of people, in fact, I think everybody has said that the UK is fortunate to have, really outstanding universities, and we do. But, when I probably shouldn't do this. It may, in fact, be in my job description not to do this. But I think it's quite important to reflect the fact that we don't really have British universities. We are fortunate enough to host these international communities in the UK. It is exceptionally important that they are open to talent, that they are the kind of places people want to come and build a research career. They are places which people pass through and go back to other countries, but remember that the institution they were in was doing something interesting. Out of that is collaboration born. Places where people come and start their journey on an academic career. Postgraduate research students are so important. They're like, I used to say before the pandemic that they're a little bit like kind of in a nice way, a kind of virus that you sort of, you can begin to spread the thing that is, you are special and good at by hosting PhD students who then go off and make careers and, will continue to build a relationship. So openness to talent seems to me incredibly important. And, I think the government talks a good game, but we've seen a stagnation in PGR, international recruitment in the UK. We're falling behind our competitors, and there's a battle being fought just probably over the road. I can't really quite work out which way I should be pointing about international students yet again. And, it's just, I just think we need to, assert and reassert. Don't kid yourself. These universities are outstanding because they are international to the tips of their fingers, and they host talent from all over the world. So that's the second point. The third point I want to make, and perhaps, just to kind of reiterate something that I think Sir Paul said very eloquently, we are in a period in which you would be wrong to think that a system like ours could compete with the sort of scale of research production in North America and China. The speed of the development of the Chinese research system, both in terms of volume and quality, is astonishing, and the level of investment will dwarf anything that the UK government, both the current government or a future Labour government will be able to match. It is only by playing as part of the region that we will achieve the scale that we need to compete. The final point I want to make is about financial sustainability, and you'd expect me to say this because this probably really is in my job description. Sir Paul said, and he's dead right, why didn't we clock that they were missing the investment that universities themselves make in research? I don't blame myself, but we collectively, UK, what a bunch of idiots. We knew that. We knew that the funding that universities themselves put into research effort, which was drawn from all sorts of other activity, but predominantly recruitment of international students, was a colossal contribution to the research system. If we think that we're recovering about 60p in the pound on on research funding at the moment. Where is the other 40p coming from? Largely international student recruitment, not exclusively, but largely. That is a very significant cross-subsidy. Shame on us for not working out earlier that we should have been pointing this out to government in a clearer sense. But we really are now, especially, as I said, in the context of the battle that's been fought over international students. But I want to make another point, and it's not to argue for universities against other actors in the research system, because I don't think that having a kind of, us but not them is a productive way. Actually, diversity in this system is really important. But remember, and I suppose it's a point about scale, visibility. The resources that international students bring because people come and study in universities, the reputational benefit that comes from having been, associated with a UK university and then gone off somewhere else. Some of that, that is one of the reasons why universities are quite special and important parts of our research system. They've got this ability to kind of, this scale and this international visibility and this special, connectedness. It's also, of course, one of the reasons I think the UK does particularly well in international rankings, for all of their flaws, is that we do conduct quite a large proportion of our research in universities, and they're the creatures that appear in rankings. So if you spread your effort, you may dilute that. Now, I think rankings have got lots to answer for, and they create unhelpful and unhealthy incentives in the system. But, that doesn't stop any minister around the world quoting how many we've currently got in the top 10 or the top 100 or the top 250. Indeed, I believe that is currently a subject of some discussion between the Treasury and Number 10. But the point is, I think that if we're thinking about a long-term strategy, one of the things we ought to be is realistic about whether, casting your mind forward 20 or 30 years, are we still going to have that advantage? Does it matter to us? Are we big enough to say we don't really care whether we're represented in the upper echelons of the rankings? Or do we think that will remain important? Now, my view, having spent a lot of time talking to ministries around the world that invest behind those institutions that appear in the upper echelons of the rankings, is that we'd be a little bit foolish to ignore the power that it conveys. So I think whatever strategy we craft should not ignore the importance of trying to maintain the UK's visibility, although I think, whether we'll have top 4 in the top 10 in 30 years' time is a subject of discussion. I should probably stop talking, but I just want to mention a couple of things in response to specific recommendations. Sir Paul's review talks about the gateway role that universities could play in signposting expertise across the system, not for local industrial partners. And that really reminded me of conversations which I hear more and more in the context of innovation. That there's a sort of sense that you need scale. You need to be able to. It's almost as though we're heading in the wrong direction with an increasing focus on quite small geographical areas. In a country like in the UK, I think we probably need to be pushing towards operating at bigger scale. And I like the recommendation that there should be no wrong door. If you come to a UK university, it should be able to facilitate connections with the expertise, whether that's found in another institution, another university, or some other part of the research system. I think that can happen. But I think we've had a period of we've got a bitty and fragmented innovation policy which has been subject to a kind of pretty hopeless churn and reinvention and I think that's going to need a bit of revisiting. The final thing I want to say is on the subject of Horizon, because I feel like I'm stuck in some awful policy Groundhog Day with Horizon Europe. Sir Paul said it provides a platform for us to collaborate with 27 other nations. It's much broader than that, because those who participate on a third country basis can play with us in, so we actually collaborate, I think, more or less every major research system. We've got collaborations that are actually sort of based on the foundation of, and there's a kind of, I think the deal is going to be done, but we need to just stop arguing about, I understand there is a kind of need to extract value for money from the UK, point of view, and we've missed 2 years and we've invested in alternatives. But I just hope that you won't get a whole bunch of people being, how do you say this, penny wise and pound foolish, because the greatest opportunity for the UK is by getting the job done quickly and then getting on with encouraging people to come back to the table and conclude us in their consortia and to collaborate with us. So the message, I think, should be chop, chop, and don't be penny wise and pound foolish. And at that, I will stop. Thank you.
Our opening speakers. I've got some questions that have come in online as well, but I think now let's begin with just giving people here an opportunity to give your comments both on what you've heard this evening and also, of course, on Paul's own report. If you could give your name and organisation, that would be fantastic, and I'm going to collect a range of comments so that the panel then have a good set of comments to respond to. Yeah, starting there.
Hello, Peter Bonfield, Vice-Chancellor, President, University of Westminster. My comments for Sir Paul and a bit for Chi. Great to see you've recognised the role of the PSREs in the innovation landscape, and really super. There's a big however, though. However, there are a bunch of organisations operating who once were PSREs, who are now longer in the bubble that's PSREs, and therefore out with the funding. So if I think there's the Welding Institute who do joinery, there's a thing I was CEO of until 5 years ago, Building Research Establishment, Camden BRI, a whole array of these entities have been around for 75 to 100 years, but somehow never quite get inside the reviews and the report, and therefore never quite get the benefit of government funding. And whereas they're great things. At BRE, we had this scheme called BREEAM, BRE Environmental Assessment Method, adopted by 65 governments around the world to design and deliver green buildings, behind which UK engineers, architects, and others exported. So my question is, how do you see the role of the private sector, the once PSREs, in the future?
Right.
To Paul and to Chi, please.
Point, Lodge, yes. Next in the gangway there, yep.
Thank you. Andrew Mackenzie from the Physiological Society. And a question for Sir Paul, and thank you also for recognising the role of learned societies as part of the ecosystem. But my question was, you talk about the need for a new framework and maybe some new institutions and more clarity and focus on the missions of these. I guess my question is, who should decide? What role do you see for government in setting the direction of research versus the research community deciding more for itself?
Right, and then let's keep on moving forward here and then to the front.
A question to two on the panel, really. My name is Giles Campion. I'm Head of Research and Development and board member of Silence Therapeutics, which is a company specializing in silencing technology for developing new therapeutics. I was just wondering what Sir Paul felt as he learnt of the US Inflation Reduction Act, because ultimately this is all about funding. And as I understand it, this will free up in the US up to 10 trillion worth of money and incentives, which is about 5 times the UK economy. The EU is responding. The UK is sort of thinking about it. But ultimately, this is going to transform the environment for research and development. And particularly for the UK, we have the opportunity to play to our strengths in terms of financial services, life sciences, which is the purpose here, and sort of AI. So the question is, what is our response to that? Because I think that's what's going to be an important question in the future. My own feeling about this is I work in life science, and I've just seen throughout my career a number of companies that get to a certain level and then disappear to the US because of lack of funding. So my own feeling here is that we are losing a huge amount of potential ability to get the gains from our investment because of the lack of funding in my environment.
Very good. And I should have begun by thanking Airto for sponsoring this event, for which we're very grateful.
You're very welcome, very welcome. Jane Gate from Airto. So, Sir Paul, huge congratulations on the report, really, because it was very, very comprehensive. It was a huge piece of work. And you haven't hesitated to sort of call a spade, which I think is really welcome. I'd like to know a bit more, really, though, about your perspective on whether you think the UK is getting the balance of funding right between the early stage research activity and the stuff that happens further down the technology readiness levels. Because if you look across at competitor nations, we estimate that there's a sort of 90 to 10 ratio in the UK, and it's probably more like 50-50 in some countries like South Korea in terms of public funding that's going in across the TRLs. And I guess tied to that, your view on whether we should be adopting a technology push or a market pull approach, and where does industry come in here to play that bigger technology pull, market pull role? Okay.
Thank you. I think what we're going to do, we've had, there's right at the back, that we must add in one more intervention. Then we'll start with Paul, because there've been so many comments, then go to the rest of the panel. Yeah.
Thank you. Helen Walker. I could have many different organisations. I think officially I'm meant to be STFC. I might be UKRI. But I would say most importantly, I'm ISIS neutron and muon source. And I would like to know where he thinks somewhere like ISIS fits in. Because officially we're an institute, but we act a bit like a PSRE because we provide a service to other people. And we want to be known as a Centre for Science Excellence that helps people do their research. And we feel that sometimes we get a little lost in between PSRE and institute.
Right. Paul, there's been so many comments. I think we should give you the first opportunity to comment on what you've heard from the panelists and the range of questions as well.
Well, there's lots there. And some of them are to do with the applications agenda. And I should repeat that my terms of reference ask me to focus on direct government funding and less on, specifically, less on industrial applications. Now, so that is why I didn't speak so much about that, but I did talk quite a lot, I felt, about how the discovery end should be interacting with the application end. And I think that is something we need to actually think about, because the way research is done in discovery and application is different, and sometimes they're mixed together. Discovery tends to be bottom up. It tends not to be focused on particular things. Closer you are to application, the more it has to be focused on particular objectives. Sometimes people think that everything should be bottom up across the board, and that simply wouldn't work. And others think that we have to establish certain areas that must be researched on top down, which is also in itself not going to be so powerful in discovery terms. So these issues are a little bit more complicated to talk about than just thinking of, market pull, and then we just identify, everything that should be done at the discovery end. What we have to do is to ensure everything works across that entire spectrum, noticing that there are commonalities like the pursuit of truth and getting it right and good culture, etc. And there are differences about whether it's top-down or bottom up. Commenting on some of the other things that turned up, the US investment that we've just seen, which of course is has strong political reasons for putting it in place in that way, simply emphasizes the fact that we are a minnow in our investment into science in this country, which is being constantly repeated, but it is a minnow. I ran a research university, Rockefeller University in the US. The amount of money I had was enormous in comparison with anything I've had in the UK. We are constantly nicking and diming, yes. It's sort of, it's the other one about, yes, we've already had a good metaphor already. We've got to take this seriously, and that does require government investment. I don't think we should howl about investment at the moment because it's just going to, it's not going to get anywhere. That's why I emphasise on planning. But we have for too long got complacent that we're very good at some of this stuff and we don't have to actually invest in it. We have to invest in it. But particularly, we have to get closer interaction between the applied side and the discovery side. And that is, then I think some of these issues actually begin to sort of fall out because the constituencies are mixed together. As long as they are separate, then it doesn't actually work so well. When I was in the US, that difference just wasn't there so strongly. And it is still strongly there now. I mean, when industry wants to do research, they go to other industries. They don't actually go to the universities. That's something that really surprised me, but that's what came out there. The loss of medium-sized companies, which is basically what we're talking about, worth maybe $1 billion, mainly to the US, that somebody brought up. Well, it is absurd. Let's look at ARMS, of course. That was sold when it was worth 700 or 800 million, if I remember correctly, to SoftBank, if I also remember correctly, because money could be made then by the investors. But there was no longer-term vision that it would actually grow, because it's so obviously such a good offering, to whatever it is now, 10, 15 billion. There is a certain conservatism with a small c amongst our investing community. This is an investment issue, and also a recognition, a better recognition by investors, the big investors, the pension funds and the like, that actually they should be in there for the long term because that's how it delivers. So we lose this stuff. We lose this stuff in pharma and so on because they simply aren't brave enough to keep going and keep that investment. So this is a matter of culture and education, I would say, in trying to deal with that. I was asked about, I can never answer the questions about balancing funding in different areas. I'm always being asked it. I mean, like in UKRI, how much do you spend on one research council versus the other research council? These are really difficult things to answer, and there isn't a simple solution. And to some extent, we can be a bit artificial about it, because if these communities are closer together, it actually blurs it. And they do, and I'm repeating myself, operate in the same way, but more bottom-up versus top-down. That isn't so difficult. Sometimes people in my institute go top-down. Sometimes they go back to bottom-up, depending on what mode they're on. And where the money goes is where it's going to be most effective, probably in a particular area at a particular time. Have I covered everything I had? This notion of recognition of some of the other organisations and so on is all to do, in my view, about mapping what we have and knowing what we have. And it is pathetic that we don't. I mean, how can you develop policy? How can you develop what to do if we don't know what we've got there? I ran into this problem because I took on the biggies, the big stuff that we knew about, and then I just, as I said, I had a sort of bin for everything else. Of course, it's almost insulting, but I mean, I'd have got into a taxonomic nightmare and abandoned it and put it all into one bin. But what we need is proper mapping, proper regular mapping, not just do it once and leave it for 5 years. I think it's something UKRI and others could get involved in. And then it informs policy. This is so bloody obvious. If you don't have the data, the knowledge and the understanding, you cannot have proper policy. I'll stop there.
Mark Wolpert made exactly that point. Indeed, he made it even when he was chief scientist, and he certainly made it when he arrived at UKRI. And I thought we had actually commissioned precisely such an exercise, which I believe was published, but it's certainly the taxonomy.
It was, Holly might remember, was it 2016 or something?
I think
2016, we had it.
Yeah.
Did we pursue it? No.
Right.
No, what the hell are we doing? Sorry.
So it does exist, but it needs to be updated, in other words. But that exercise has been done. Can I just ask you one specific question, Paul? Because one of the things you have And that's all right, don't worry, it's not a trick question.
Do I need to open the 165?
It's your quick wins. It's your quick wins. And one of the points you make, which I think is very well made, I agree with, is you cite some of the new research institutes like Alan Turing and Rosalind Franklin, which had such a hard time getting started. And elsewhere in your report, you very briefly refer to catapults. I have to say, I saw catapults, part of the logic of creating catapults, based on the German Fraunhofer model, was precisely also, I saw that as a template, which would mean every time people in future wish to create some kind of intermediate research institute, there were, instead of, because I heard the story, instead of spending a year getting legal advice and deciding whether to be a charity or whether to be a limited company with a public purpose or whether you're going to be in the private sector or the public sector, and incidentally the most important thing is don't be in the public sector. The catapults were a legal agreed model. And so I personally think the solution to that problem is under your nose, which is in future, if we want to set up an applied research institute, and this is a very powerful argument to the contrary, make it a catapult.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Okay, well, I just return back to what I was saying about the pre-existing institute, simply because we have set up a number of things and they aren't working. And, you know, when I read that we need to set up yet more, it just makes my heart sink, because we have to sort out, if we want a Rosalind Franklin Institute, they've got to have proper funding to operate. At the moment, it is madness. And then when Secretary of State comes and visits, you know, somebody up there tells them, don't complain about anything to the Secretary of State. She's only just been in the job a week and it won't be the right thing to do. So then they say, everything's working wonderfully. I tell the Secretary of State it's a load of rubbish. And they say, well, no, I mean, this is just a ridiculous way to operate, okay? So I think what we need there is a proper assessment of all. The Turing is another one, you know, it's these hub and spoke models is just a way of trying to do something without any money. Now, Fraunhofer, I mean, they're good information transfer, but not to actually run anything. So I was actually really supportive of the Fraunhofer experiment. But look what we've done it on half cock. It's about 5% of the size of Germany, certainly no more than 10%. I mean, it's minuscule, that's the first thing. Secondly, we haven't, you know, in this review, I went round some of the Fraunhofers, and it isn't quite as rosy as I thought it was going to be. So we have something to learn from them about what isn't working in the Fraunhofers, because I was surprised at that. And I didn't do enough work on it to be able to actually, although they now write to me and say, we would really like to tell you what isn't working in Fraunhofer. So there is something sort of that is not working there. But the principle's got to be right. And the notion of a 10, you know, something like, you know, a 10 or 15-year mission-oriented initiative to try and put things together, something around that, if properly set up with proper funding.
Germany has the opposite problem from us. The German problem is they've got these institutes that have been around for decades, and how do you renew them? How do you renew their purpose? And do you create a new institute, or do you renew the purpose of an existing institute?
I know I'm in trouble. Units, 30 people, 40 people, you are more easy. Institutes are a bloody nuisance, because I mean, you know, I run one.
Speaking as around others first,
and the reality is, we could never be closed. I mean, we're too big to fail. So you have to have a system that actually constantly regenerates itself. Sorry,
we must hear from you. Your view, and let's get your observations on all this. Anything you particularly want to add? And what is the official Labour position on the report? Is the report accepted by you? Is this something that a Labour government would implement?
There's three things I'm going to talk about: the report, mapping, and the IRA. So the report is welcomed by us. That's the official position. We are studying its recommendations, and I think I set out some of the recommendations where we clearly, so the long-term funding plan, for example, we agree absolutely with that outcome. And I think, you know, the complexity of the research ecosystem, etc., how we make that work in practice, we need to look at the detail of the recommendations, but we also need to look at the details of the implications for some of our other policy objectives, which I also sort of set out some of them around the regional driving regional growth and driving growth. We have an ambition to be the highest growth in the G7. That's hugely ambitious. and so everything that I do, Keir Starmer wants to make sure that I'm reflecting that. So it's welcome. There's so many things that we agree with, but we're not saying I'm not setting out now what we would do in the first 6 months of a Labour government. For example, we will do that closer to the election. But it's a fantastic review. I think I've said that a number of times. I also, just on mapping, I did have because I put down a number of parliamentary questions to George Freeman about this very issue. My understanding is that there's another big thing of mapping going on right now, which will be reporting before the summer, and we'll have an interactive tool to see where our private and public sector science assets are, which I think that is something that we should know, and it's good that it's happening. But let's talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, because I think that's really important. And it's Giles, isn't it? So I think you start off by saying it's all about the money, which I would not agree with. In as much as I think there's our science ecosystem, has multiple interfaces that we talked about, multiple areas where it could be more effective, more efficient, could drive more private sector investment, for example, from the public sector investment. But I agree with you very strongly that money matters, and the size of the Inflation Reduction Act, it's how can I put this? Some of the tax breaks. It's mainly tax breaks, but the tax breaks companies have to pass certain tests around, for example, the unionization of membership, around the sustainability of what they're doing, where the reward comes to. It is, it's a huge intervention. When we see the European Union responding to that, and I think we certainly need to be responding in a way which shows how we are going to meet the same goals. That doesn't mean that we're going to be spending pound for dollar or on the same level. It's not necessarily desirable, but we have our Green Prosperity Fund, which is £28 billion per year till 2030 to be spent in driving a green economy. And when you look at that total funding, it's not as much as the US compared to population or GDP. It's not as much as the US, but it is a very significant investment over quite a long term, and that will support green. It will support insulation in homes, which people may not think is a hugely innovative thing, but actually, it will make a huge difference. But it'll also support green technologies, it'll support hydrogen, it'll support clean steel, for example. We've identified some of the areas of innovation which we'll be investing, and that is what we need. We need something like that, and I don't see that. I don't see anything like that from the government. We need to give, when businesses and I speak to businesses like in semiconductors, for example, in green technology, when they are making decisions about where they are going to grow, the support and the environment that government sets is absolutely key. And also, just finally, having that investment, the potential for investment, and that's why I say, it's not necessarily all about money, in as much as we have one of the best financial sectors in the world, not the biggest, but when a company is trying to get its second round of funding, it finds it incredibly difficult to get it in this country. So making that work better is got to be, as well as the absolute amount, making the environment work better to take that step from scientific research to growth and past mid-size, if you like. That's what we're focused on, making work better as well.
Thank you. I'm just going to take, if I may, quick interventions from Vivienne and Peter, because I also need to include some of the questions we've had online. Vivienne, anything you particularly want to say at this stage?
Very, very briefly, the pension funds and their investment in sort of innovative companies keeps coming up, and I guess the question is, what is it about pensions regulation? Why is it pension companies? Why is it the Canadian teachers' pension scheme is such a big investor in in UK, mid-sized startups, and the UK sector isn't. What is it about our pension system that needs fixing? And I think that deserves a bit of attention from our table too.
Jeremy Hunt asks the same question. The answer is partly our, including our public sector pension schemes, are smaller and more fragmented. And smaller schemes tend to be more risk averse. And secondly, our big defined benefit schemes are closed. And the closed schemes with aging members tend to shift to bonds, not equities. But there's another attempt at promoting mergers of pension funds going on at the moment. Peter, anything you want to say?
One thing, which is, I'd say, don't despair.
It's not been that bad. We
are capable of bringing a lot of these entities together on national challenges. The National Quantum Technology Programme hasn't been perfect, but just under 10 years ago, it brought together research councils, government organisations, PSREs, and we led the world in the way that we put that programme together. And in fact, somebody mentioned Fraunhofer's. The one Fraunhofer in the UK has probably, it's one of the two organisations that's done more work and been in more collaborative activities than any other. Modesty forbids me from saying who the other one is. And it goes from strength to strength, and it's thought leadership. And we've seen huge investments in quantum technology around the big budgets around the world. But that approach was led from here, so we can do these things.
Thank you very much. I'm now I must refer to 2 or 3 of the online questions that have been upvoted, and then we'll also collect some final interventions from the audience and aim to finish about 1:45. So the one point online from John Wood: is there a role for universities and science management organisations in running UK PSREs, as is the case in the US, where Department of Energy facilities involve organisations like Battelle? There's an interesting story of Battelle and its involvement here, but should we look to them for more professional management? There's another observation from an anonymous attendee. I always think the anonymous ones are the civil servants. Treat them with particular respect. Anonymous, the view of the prospect of universities to be engines for local economic growth further dilutes their innovation role, but also dilutes other institutions that sit in the translationary space. Universities are not necessarily going to be good at this new function that's been allocated to them. I might ask Vivienne in a moment to comment on that point. And then another point that's been upvoted: funding schemes need to encourage collaboration between PSREs and universities, which was a missed opportunity with ARPIV. So is there an opportunity to design a funding scheme that promotes links between universities, the private sector, and PSREs? I think envisaging something more triangular rather than just bilateral between universities and the private sector. So clock those 3 points from our online participants. Any other people here who wish to intervene? Yes, there's 2 there we must take.
Hi, I'm Yolana Pringle. I'm from Vitae. I'm interested in learning a bit more about permeability and people. So I was interested, Sir Paul Nurse, in what you were saying about how the knowledge of opportunities should be available to everyone. And I wondered if you could comment on how that might be taken forward.
Thanks, and pass the microphone forward. Yep.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Orban. I lead a research group in one of the units that have been mentioned but not represented. I was wondering, especially to Sir Paul, how he finds the current funding changes in the Rdi Landscape in units. We're a dying breed, and the MRC has now changed our funding model substantially, meaning so I was wondering how we balance the sort of flexibility of units as mechanisms of innovation, but then also allowing the researchers in them to prosper, not be kind of put into uncertainty on a regular basis, which seems to be the kind of model that especially the MRC is running on at the moment.
Thank you. Then at the front here.
Thank you. I'm Rachel Guberman-Hill. I'm co-chair of the UK Committee on Research Integrity, and I'm here with my co-chair, Andrew George. Because we're focused on integrity, we've got a keen interest in open science and open research, and we'd see those practices as really key to underpinning reproducibility and confidence and trust in research. So my question is about the relationship between investment in the structures and infrastructure needed to support open research and open science. And I'd like to know whether the panel thinks that there's sufficient attention paid to future risks of not putting enough investment into open research infrastructure.
Thank you for that important point. And then very quickly, these comments in the front here.
Andy Sellers from the Compound Semiconductor Applications Catapult. We've heard about the need to map what's already in existence and to prioritise. We've also heard about the need for a sort of a long-term 10-year view on interventions. And I guess my question is there a country in the world that is really getting this right? Is there an exemplar that we could actually follow?
Yes, and then behind you, yes.
Thank you. It's Tom Livermore here from the Academy of Medical Sciences. Thank you to all of the panel, and particularly Sir Paul, for mentioning the report that we published last week. My question is the extent to which the panel see the NHS as part of our RDI landscape, whether we should, and how we might achieve that for
Thank you.
the system and patients.
Pass along there.
And Owen Jackson, I'm Director of Policy at Cancer Research UK. I think I'm right in saying I'm the only explicitly charity rep in the room, which is interesting. And so Paul, we obviously welcomed your report, which commented on the role that charities play in the UK's research infrastructure. CR UK, for instance, funds. We're the largest independent funder of cancer research in the world. And if you take UK cancer research, half is funded by industry, and of what remains, about half is funded by CR UK. So my question picks up on something Vivienne said around global mobility of research talent. I was talking to one of our institute directors recently who said it's almost as expensive, or in fact it's more expensive now to get a PhD student from the EU than a postdoc. So what are the things that we as a sector should be pointing to government and saying, this needs fixing, what are the things that we need to change?
Thank you. And then finally at the back there, yep. Then we'll start with Peter and move across the final word for Paul. Yep.
Hilary Leashing from AstraZeneca. I want to first thank you for your report and for letting so many Panglots contribute towards it. My question is very quick. It's just how you see this work laddering up with the government's current strategies from the Department for Science and Technology, and how they can drive things forward in the next 6 to 12 months.
Good. Now let's start with Peter. I mean, choose any particular point you want to respond to, but also you've got over here a potential future minister and the guy who's just produced the report. What would you most like them to do? So this is your opportunity also to identify the priorities as you see them.
Okay, so picking off a couple of the questions very briefly. One question about universities owning PSREs. My own PSRE is in a strategic partnership with two universities, Surrey and Strathclyde, and their vice-chancellors sit on my board. It's not an ownership model, but it certainly, I benefit greatly from their wisdom and the way that they help shape NPL. On reproducibility in scientific research, it's frankly shocking how much research has to be started again by industry. The life sciences sector, I think, is particularly poor in terms of the stats for this, so I would encourage probably a whole future FST event on that,
I think that's very
on that subject.
Right.
In terms of folks over on the other side of the table, I probably said enough when I spoke, but you know, let leaders lead, and we can deliver a lot of these outcomes across the system.
Thank you very much. Vivienne?
There are so many questions that all but the last one have disappeared from my head, so I'm just going to respond to that one, which is the penultimate one. Apologies. I'm going to make a very controversial, whack it in under a sort of slim pretext answer to that question, which is fix the undergraduate teaching problem, because at the moment what's happening is that the available cross subsidy is getting channeled into propping up the teaching of home undergraduates, when it should be invested back in, you know, we could invest back into the research system, including talent attraction, so fully funding PhD studentships from other parts of the world, that the institutions need those resources in order to be able to bring people in who will contribute in the long term to the health of the system. And that flatlining, I guess, to answer your question, I am, as I've indicated, a super fan of the idea of kind of coming up with a 10-year framework. But I guess one thing I would particularly ask for is attention to that flatlining postgraduate research talent line. We've got to do something about it because we're in a race.
Absolutely. The freeze of university tuition fees is meaning a cut in research spend.
Which means that the research community has to get on that horse.
Yeah, exactly. Gee, what are your final observations for
Okay.
us?
I'm trying to respond to the question. I'll just say the NHS should absolutely be a platform for innovation which benefits patients and it benefits our economy as well, because it is a fantastic resource, but it's not how it's working right now. And we're talking to within the Labour front bench around that. Open science, absolutely yes. To the investment that, investing and supporting that. I think the online question that said that universities should not be, or being engines of regional growth would dilute their role. That is not what universities tell me. So if that is going to be, most universities say to me that's what they're trying to do already, and the civic universities and being grounded in their communities. So that, so if we see barriers to that, but we don't see a barrier, if you like, to the objective. We see barriers to the implementation. I'd be very keen to understand better. But the thing I wanted to finish on, I think one of the great challenges, if you like, so we talk about long-term funding, and I think that's absolutely sort of key to giving stability and to giving allowing science to develop and push back the boundaries and then to drive forward to application. But we need to make sure that long-term funding does not end up in support of excellence, does not end up in being funding to the same people at the same time to do the same things, and how we get away from one of the things we're studying the report was how we get away from some of the inefficiencies and repetitive competitiveness, whilst maintaining a kind of the disruption of new innovative sort of scientific teams and objectives. I think that over the long term, I think that is the key challenge, one of the key challenges we face.
Very interesting challenge for you to set to the community. Very, very interesting. Paul, your final observations.
Yes, I spoke a lot at the beginning, so I'll be short, just tackle a couple of things. There was questions around PSREs, MRC units and so on in relationship with universities. I recommended that on the whole, institutes and PSREs and units linked to a university makes quite a lot of sense. Actually, not just a university. I think a big industrial complex is another possibility there, which is not often discussed, Rolls-Royce or whatever, and that isn't something that is generally talked about. Whether they're run by the university or simply co-located is an issue. There's been a tendency for the UKRI, at least the MRC part of UKRI, to push them onto universities. You sense, because it sort of means they're off their books in a way, and I think there needs to be a more strategic sort of view of that. If they are run by universities, I think they have to have a standard of service delivery which is higher than what actually they have. Because when MRC units, which has been happening over the last 10 years, are transferred to universities, the quality of support is not always adequate. I mean, you're nodding your head, and that is really something that is that the universities need to step up to the plate. In the US, as somebody said, the universities do run facilities and they get closed. I mean, because they're assessed every sort of 5 years or 7 years if they don't reach the standard. So co-locate always, I would say. So you've got critical mass. They could be independent, and I think pushing it off your books just so, because it's a sort of, good on your balance sheet, I don't think is the right approach. But having quality of standards, I'd say, is important. NHS, really critical. The NHS, we ought to have the greatest clinical research activity in the world. We've got a single unitary system. In the US, you've got everything is different. so effective. We've got great clinical research, and yet it's floating away, okay? And the reason is very simple. Because there isn't the funding in the NHS to run it properly, every doctor is being pulled into just doing frontline research, frontline service delivery, and they can't do research. This has got to be solved immediately. It is just, it's terrible. We could have, and we should have, because clinical trials could be seen and positioned as the people's clinical trials. I mean, you can pull it out from the sort of commercial, or it's the people's clinical trial. We have a gem here which we are simply not exploiting. So that's the second thing. Charities, the final thing. I actually was going to say one comment about charities, or is primarily that the amount of money which substitutes for the QR element it's simply been going down and down for the charities, to the level that universities are now saying we don't want charitable money because we can't afford to take it. This is another aspect of lunacy, okay? We don't want the charitable money because if we take it, we don't have the money. Do you remember what I said about end-to-end funding? Yeah. We don't have the end-to-end funding in place. So we have to deal with the charities specifically with that.
Thank you very much. And your whole point about full economic costing, and if everybody is only willing to fund research at 70% and 80%, and let's face it, charities themselves have been culprits for this. Yes. If everybody only comes in at 70 or 80%, the whole system becomes non-viable. And yours is a very powerful warning of that. And thank you very much. I would say, I mean, this health theme has just emerged, is very powerful. I don't think MRC are doing this for, quote, balance sheet reasons. The main reason they're doing it is because you rightly show in your report, the controls, if you are in the public sector, are so intense. Everyone is desperate to get out of the public sector.
I should have said
so they can operate more freely. If we want them to stop doing this, we need to follow your agenda and give greater freedoms to people with...
Actually, I have that with my own institute. The MRC didn't put more than 50% into capital. For that reason, I didn't understand why they didn't until about 5 years later. And it's exactly what you said. I should have mentioned that. Yeah.
Well, we've had a fantastic session. I'm very grateful to Peter Thompson, to Vivienne Stern, for Onwurah, who's given us a glimpse of Labour policy, and they're welcome for this report. And of course, Paul himself. It's been fantastic, Paul. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Airto for your sponsorship of this event. And the next meeting of the FST is actually next week on the 24th of May at back in the Royal Society, an event on the UK semiconductor strategy. Thank you all very much indeed. There's a drink next door.